My husband, Jonathan Jean, remembers everyone after the car accident. Except for me. He stubbornly believes that my stepsister is the love of his life. My father says they were childhood sweethearts, destined to be together. Even our mutual friends are urging me to give up on this relationship. But I quietly tore up the late-stage liver cancer diagnosis, willingly playing the role of a woman who stands by her love. They don't know that Jonathan is dying, and I am his only relative in this world, as well as his only guardian during his illness. Chapter 1. Jonathan had a car accident. I was shopping with my best friend Jennifer when I received the call from his secretary. By the time I rushed to the hospital, I was greeted by the sight of Jonathan's head wrapped in white bandages and my stepsister Rebecca crying her eyes out beside him. I frowned at their clasped hands, wanting to remind Rebecca that he was my husband. But before I could tell Rebecca to leave, Jonathan slowly regained consciousness. His eyes roamed around the room before landing on Rebecca in front of him. The atmosphere in the room became intimate. He gently wiped away the tears from the corner of Rebecca's eyes with his free hand, as if I, his rightful wife, did not exist. My heart ached deeply. 5 years of marriage had long since faded the passion of youth. Although we couldn't maintain the initial romance, we still respected each other and lived harmoniously. He had never treated me like this in front of others, completely disregarding my feelings. But considering he had just been in a car accident, I chose to swallow my bitterness and softly asked, "Jonathan, are you feeling any discomfort?" Only then did Jonathan turn his head to look at me, asking in confusion, "Who are you?" I nearly lost my balance, staring at him in disbelief. Had he lost his memory? But judging by his interaction with Rebecca, it didn't seem like amnesia. I approached the bed cautiously and tested the waters. "I'm your wife, Celeste. Don't you remember?" Impossible. The only person I love is Becky. How could I have married another woman? My words seemed to anger Jonathan, who immediately denied our relationship loudly. Perhaps due to the emotional upheaval, he clutched his head in pain after speaking, worried something might happen to him. I called for the doctor without delving deeper into his relationship with Rebecca. After a few minutes of examination, the doctor reached a conclusion. To avoid agitating Jonathan, the doctor called me into the office and announced the results with a sympathetic tone. Jonathan had lost his memory, but only regarding me. Then he handed me a diagnosis report, pointing to a few figures inside, and informed me that Jonathan was in the late stages of liver cancer. He had at most 6 months to live, and I should prepare myself for that. In that instant, I felt as if I had fallen into an ice cave, my heart skipping a beat. Jonathan and I had been together for over a decade, from having nothing to where we are today, going through all sorts of ups and downs. Even though he now forgot about me and believed he always loved Rebecca, the undeniable truth was that he was my husband, my closest person in this world. I walked out of the doctor's office in a daze, stood in the hallway, and cried my heart out. Chapter 2. Jonathan and I met in college. He was a student council officer, and I was a freshman. My parents were in the midst of a tumultuous divorce at the time, and I went to college alone. Seeing me by myself, Jonathan took it upon himself to help me with various registration procedures. It was during this time that we exchanged contact information. He was very helpful, assisting me on many occasions thereafter. As a gesture of gratitude, I often treated him to meals, and gradually, a special bond developed between us. We officially became a couple during a trip to Happy Valley. The senior students organized a group ticket because it was cheap, so Jennifer and I decided to go. Once at Happy Valley, I regretted it. Jennifer loved thrilling rides, but I was timid and couldn't participate in many activities. While I was bored waiting for Jennifer, Jonathan appeared. He took me on a few children's rides and then set his sights on the water rafting ride. I still remember that day vividly. As the boat reached the highest point, I closed my eyes in fear. Then, a warm hand pulled me into an embrace. Feeling his heartbeat near my ear, I instinctively clung tightly to Jonathan. When the splashing water hit our raincoats, Jonathan's confession came from above me. "Celeste, will you be my girlfriend?" I looked up to see his raincoat fluttering in the wind, his hair soaked, and love filling his eyes like the rippling water. Resonating within me, my heart raced. I wasn't sure if it was from the ride or Jonathan's confession. Acting on impulse, I buried my face in his chest and softly replied, "Okay." We eventually graduated from college and joined the same company. After working for a few years, we decided to quit and start our own business, capitalizing on the live streaming trend, and our company grew steadily. Once the company stabilized, our families began urging us to get married. On the day we received our marriage license, both families planned to have a meal together in advance, but our first real meeting was in the morgue. A car carrying 5 people was hit by a drunk driver and was sent flying. My mother, Jonathan's parents, and his grandparents all died that day. Jonathan and I became family that day, and we also became each other's only family. Now, is fate trying to take away my only family as well? In the bustling hospital, my quiet sobbing attracted some attention. Soon, I saw 2 familiar figures in the crowd, my dad and my stepmother. They seemed to be looking for me specifically and walked straight toward me. I wiped away my tears, not wanting them to see my vulnerability, but it seemed they were here to mock me, hitting me where it hurt right away. I heard Jonathan lost his memory and doesn't remember you. He likes our Becky now, so you should know better and divorce him. Hearing the word divorce, I abruptly looked up at them. During the accident, only Jonathan survived. He had just woken up less than half an hour ago, and I had just learned the test results. My dad and his family lived in the south of the city, while the hospital was in the north. The commute time alone was more than half an hour. Moreover, Jonathan and I hadn't had any contact with them for years, so there was no way they could have found out while visiting Jonathan. Why were they so sure Jonathan had lost his memory and forgotten me? How did they get here so quickly? Something was off. My stepmother looked smug, as if Jonathan, this excellent son-in-law, was already hers. My dad was equally satisfied. After divorcing my mom years ago, he used his share of the assets to open a grocery store, barely making ends meet these years. With Rebecca catching Jonathan, my dad probably dreamed of wealth. Ignoring their sneers, I quickly placed the diagnosis report into my handbag and headed straight to Jonathan's ward without looking back. I needed to discuss his subsequent treatment with him, and I had to find out if he really had lost his memory. Chapter 3. Opening the ward. I saw Rebecca feeding Jonathan. I frowned, looking at the tender exchange between their eyes. If I remember correctly, Jonathan injured his head in the accident, not his hands. Catching my gaze, Rebecca's eyes quickly reddened, tears threatening to fall, making her look pitiful. She stood up and nervously explained, "Sister, I was just feeding Jonathan because he was hungry. If you mind." At that moment, I didn't want to compete with her for Jonathan's attention. His condition was the most important thing. I immediately interrupted her. "Miss Zhang, I want to speak to Jonathan alone." But Rebecca wrung her hands, her eyes anxiously darting to Jonathan, seemingly troubled by my words. "Enough." Jonathan cut off my words. The usually composed and reserved Jonathan had reddened eyes. Ignoring the 4 in his hand, he got up from the bed and embraced Rebecca. In his eyes was a disgust I had never seen before, and his words were unfamiliar to me. "I don't know you. Please leave." No wife can accept her husband protecting another woman in front of her, even if the reason might be that he has forgotten about me. I tried to control my anger and stay calm. Jonathan's health was the priority. "Jonathan, I am your wife. I came to discuss your illness with you." Jonathan thought I was referring to his amnesia and dismissed it casually. "Becky has already explained our relationship to me. But now, the only person I love is Becky. Let's get a divorce." The man in front of me became a stranger, reminding me of the first time I discovered Rebecca's existence. Our company was already on track at that time, but socializing and drinking were inevitable. Once, I drank so much that I had a stomach hemorrhage. Jonathan, distressed for me, advised me to become a full-time housewife. I spent 3 days in the hospital on an 4 drip, weak and frail, seeing him equally exhausted from taking care of me. I agreed without hesitation. Later, while cleaning, a double photo fell out of an album. Jonathan was hugging a girl. They looked very compatible. The photo was covered in dust, showing no signs of being touched for a long time. Having been in the business world for many years, I was past the age of being jealous of an ex-girlfriend. so I didn't think much of the photo, until one company annual meeting. I saw a woman in an expensive dress beside Jonathan, who turned out to be the girl in the photo. Only then did I find out through a detective that the girl in the photo was Rebecca, my stepfather's daughter and Jonathan's first love. I couldn't help but marvel at my and my mother's taste in men, choosing those who fell for a mother-daughter pair. Before I could bring up Rebecca to Jonathan, she left her job. Jonathan came home on time every day, showing no signs of rekindling old feelings with her. Given the current situation, it seemed their feelings had never truly ended. Despite being angry at Jonathan for keeping his relationship with Rebecca hidden, he was still my husband. I wasn't willing to give up, Jonathan. We've been together for over a decade. I must. Before I could finish, my dad and stepmother entered the ward. They were sweating profusely, as if it had taken a great effort to find Jonathan's room. My dad tried to drag me out of the ward, while my stepmother feigned concern. Celeste, Becky and Jonathan grew up together. Their feelings for each other are no less than yours. Seeing I wasn't leaving, my dad also tried to persuade me. Yes, they were childhood sweethearts. They belonged together. Sully, listen to your dad. Don't make things difficult for Jonathan. Divorce him, he said, pulling me out more forcefully. I stumbled and saw Rebecca holding her slightly swollen belly. In a flash, I understood. The amnesia was a ruse to get me to divorce him. Rebecca was probably already carrying their child. I was dragged outside. My dad still trying to persuade me. Why are you being so stubborn? Jonathan has been so good to you. Can you bear to see him troubled? With my suspicions confirmed, I didn't bother arguing with my dad and rushed to the small garden downstairs to call Catherine. As a full-time housewife, I had sponsored many students over the years. Catherine was a university student I had anonymously supported. She had worked her way up to become one of Jonathan's secretaries. But Catherine didn't know our relationship, nor did anyone else. Receiving my call, Catherine was surprised. Our previous contact had always been through bank transactions. I directly revealed my identity as her sponsor and inquired about the company's situation. Catherine hesitated but eventually told me about the recent happenings at the company. Finally, she seemed to gather her courage and told me that Jonathan and Rebecca had been together all these years. My heart felt torn apart, and I could hardly breathe from the pain, even though I had suspected Jonathan had fallen for someone else and wanted to divorce me. Confirming the truth was still unbearable. Our youthful love had turned into a calculated scheme. How did we end up like this? Was it because of the halo of first love? I stayed in the small garden all morning, reminiscing about the past, until Jennifer called to ask about Jonathan. I told her what happened at the hospital and shared my suspicions. Jennifer was silent for a moment before firmly concluding, "You can't divorce him." Looking at the patients coming and going in the garden, I suddenly had an epiphany. Yes, late-stage liver cancer is incurable. Jonathan will die anyway. My money cannot be divided among others. If my mom knew that my money ended up with my dad's family, she would probably turn in her grave. I took out the diagnosis report and slowly tore it into pieces. Jonathan, if you can be cruel, don't blame me for being ruthless. Chapter 4. I knocked on the doctor's office door and told the doctor that I had already informed Jonathan about his condition and that we would soon take him abroad for treatment. Since there was a pregnant sister beside Jonathan, I was afraid she wouldn't be able to handle the shock, so I requested the doctor not to mention liver cancer again. Then, I went to Jonathan's ward and saw the lively atmosphere inside. It was as if the four of them were a family. When I entered, Jonathan glanced at me indifferently. I pretended to be deeply in love with him, ignoring his attitude, and walked straight up to him. "Have you really forgotten me?" Jonathan turned his head away in disgust, as if I were something dirty. Even though I had expected his reaction, my heart still ached. Choking up, I continued, "I can divorce you." Jonathan looked at me with suspicion, seemingly surprised at how smoothly things were going. At the same time, the other three people in the room showed expressions of joy, which I pretended not to notice. I went on, "But I don't want you to regret it once you remember everything. So, if you agree, let's take 1 month to try and find your memories together. If after 1 month, you still don't remember me, I will agree to let you go. A peaceful separation." After saying this, I couldn't hold back my emotions any longer. I squatted down and cried softly in front of Jonathan. I knew Jonathan would agree. Compared to me filing for divorce due to his infidelity, a peaceful separation was more appealing to him. But there's still a 1-month cooling-off period before the divorce. Within these 2 months, if Jonathan can still take care of himself, then I'll admit defeat. After a long while, Jonathan's voice came from above me, filled with barely concealed joy. Just like that time in the amusement park. Okay. Chapter 5. Eager to get rid of me, Jonathan couldn't wait to move back home that night. The car accident hadn't been serious, and aside from his memory loss, he only had a few minor injuries. I prepared the ingredients for a hot pot at home and bought a few bottles of ergot. Jonathan frowned when he saw the dinner. Now, as a CEO, he was used to lavish meals and hadn't tasted heavily oily and spicy food in years. But given that I would agree to the divorce in a month, he didn't say much. I poured the ergot into his glass and thought about our past. When the company was first founded, we were tight on funds. After landing our first client, we celebrated at home with hot pot. Do you remember what you said? Jonathan was momentarily stunned. Then, to hide his guilt, he downed the white liquor in front of him in one gulp. I knew he remembered. That year, we invested all our money into the company, but the company didn't develop smoothly. We took many wrong turns. We squeezed into a small single room, eating discounted vegetables sold after 8 p.m. at the supermarket. Because money was tight. After securing our first order, we didn't dare to celebrate lavishly. We both craved hot pot. So Jonathan went to the supermarket to buy the ingredients, and we cooked it ourselves in our rented room. I still remember him continuously drinking the 5-yuan ergot in front of him, giving me all the meat in his bowl without eating a piece himself. Back then, he said he would give me the best of everything. Now, it seems those were just drunken words. I refilled his glass, put more meat in his bowl, and reminisced about our years together. Jonathan didn't dare look me in the eyes, but due to our agreement, he couldn't leave. He drank in silence all night. When Jonathan finally passed out on the table, I helped him to bed and took a suggestive photo. I immediately posted it on my social media, visible only to my dad. Sure enough, Jonathan's phone rang shortly after. Rubbing his forehead, Jonathan answered the call. He reassured Rebecca gently for a while before hanging up. Perhaps Rebecca said something, because Jonathan eventually got up, leaned against the wall, and went to sleep in the guest room. As he walked past me, I deliberately waved my hand, which had touched onions, in front of my eyes, pretending to be heartbroken and tearful. The next morning, Jonathan went to work. I took the opportunity to contact the private detective from back then to investigate Rebecca's family. Within the morning, the detective sent me information about Rebecca's recent life. It turned out that after the party years ago, Jonathan had kept Rebecca hidden away, playing the role of a secret lover. They had been together for 3 years, and Rebecca had just found out she was pregnant 2 days ago. That's why Jonathan was so eager to divorce me, to give Rebecca a legitimate status. The car accident was also part of the plan, designed to ensure Jonathan could divorce me smoothly. Looking at the evidence the detective provided, I felt numb. Jonathan had been with her all along, and I had no idea. No wonder he came home so late every day, using the excuse of not disturbing me to sleep in separate rooms. He had been keeping himself chaste for Rebecca for years. The irony is, I thought Jonathan was being considerate of me. I paid the detective a large sum of money to continue tracking Jonathan. The next day, Catherine called to tell me that Rebecca had been appointed as the administrative manager and had arranged for several of her relatives to join the company. When I heard the names of these relatives, my nails dug deep into my flesh. How dare he? I had told Jonathan about my family background, how my dad's relatives bullied my mom every time my parents fought. He couldn't possibly not know. The company we painstakingly built required employees to at least have graduated from top universities. Yet among this group, the highest qualification was a junior college degree. Rebecca herself hadn't even graduated from secondary school. Chapter 6. Suppressing my anger. I drove to the company. After taking a walk around the company, I discovered that most of my familiar colleagues had left, and the remaining ones didn't dare to look at me. Seeing the swaggering relatives, My temples throbbed with anger. I pushed open the office door of the HR manager, only to find him drinking tea with Rebecca and Jonathan. The HR manager, Michael, was a college friend of both Jonathan and me. He stood up awkwardly as soon as he saw me, ignoring his expression. I wanted to question Jonathan. He knew how humiliating it was for my mother and me when we were kicked out, but I held back and explained the company's hiring policies to him. Unexpectedly, a group of people barged into the office as soon as I finished speaking. They began to push me without saying a word, causing me to bump into the desk and feel a sharp pain in my abdomen. But they didn't stop, loudly accusing me. My uncle was right. You're just as selfish as your mother, trying to kick us out. It's impossible. I always said it was right to kick her out of our Zhang family. Look at how she treats us. Not like family at all. Becky is so much better. She always thinks of us first. Unlike a certain ungrateful person, surrounded by accusations. I looked to Jonathan for help. I then realized Jonathan wasn't even looking at me. He had his hand protectively over Rebecca's belly, fearing I might harm the child inside her. In the end, it was Michael who noticed my cold sweat and came to my rescue. He took me to the hospital, and after confirming I was fine, he tried to persuade me kindly. Since Jonathan had forgotten me, I should agree to the divorce to preserve the last bit of dignity between us. I just smiled without replying. Then I called Jennifer, asking her to quietly investigate Catherine and find out as much as possible. For the next month, I continued reminiscing with Jonathan and occasionally adding stress to his liver. I thought I could get through the month peacefully with Becky, but something happened the day before we were supposed to go to the Civil Affairs Bureau. Chapter 7. When Rebecca came to see me with her pregnant belly, I knew that Jonathan had more ambitious plans than I had imagined. I politely invited Rebecca in. She looked around the living room, her eyes filled with greed. I advise you to divorce Jonathan obediently. He will never remember you. Rebecca raised her chin arrogantly, looking at me with disdain as if Jonathan was already her private property. I glanced out the window. Across the street, my stepmother and father were directing movers in front of a villa, both dressed in designer clothes. They looked radiant, their expressions mirroring Rebecca's. Suddenly, a smile tugged at my lips. I sat down on the sofa, amused. This woman was still as foolish as ever. I really wanted to see her reaction when she learned the truth. If you're so confident, why bother warning me? I picked up the coffee on the table and took a sip. When I looked up again, Rebecca's smile was gone, replaced by a look of hatred in her eyes. She suddenly rushed forward, knocked over the coffee, and then threw herself onto the ground with all her might. Blood began to flow along with her groans, staining the carpet red in a matter of moments. At that moment, my stepmother burst into my house with the movers, pointing at me and shouting, "You vile woman, can't have your own child, so you want to harm my grandson." I was stunned into silence by the scene in front of me. Rebecca, in order to frame me, was willing to kill her own child. Chapter 8. Hospital. Rebecca was wheeled into the emergency room, and my father slapped me across the face. "You're just as vicious as your mother. If anything happens to that child, you'll pay for it." Holding my burning cheek, I looked at my father in disbelief. I never thought that this man, who had been weak his entire life, would hit his own daughter for Rebecca. Years ago, because he was seen as an honest man, my mother married him without much thought. But his honesty meant he was often bullied at work. Even after working for over 20 years, he still earned the lowest salary. Despite living off my mother's breakfast shop, he insisted on helping his relatives. When I was 18 and needed money for college tuition, my mother refused to lend money to his relatives for medical bills. This small act of refusal turned into great resentment, and the next day, people from our village came to urge my parents to divorce. In her anger, my mother decided to leave with me, taking nothing with us. Since then, I hadn't contacted him, not even when my mother passed away. Now, he dared to hit me. I immediately slapped him back, hard, and threatened him fiercely. "If you dare to hit me again, I'll file for divorce in court tomorrow. Not only that, but I'll also file to reclaim the marital property. You can forget about living in that big villa. Don't think I'm a pushover. I'm not afraid of you. I just don't want to stoop to your level." I put all my strength into that slap, knocking my father to the ground. He lay there, stunned. Seeing this, my stepmother forgot about Rebecca in surgery and lunged at me. I didn't dodge. Instead, I kicked her away. Both of them lay on the ground in ridiculous positions. Just then, Jonathan arrived after hearing the news. He helped them up and then turned to me, frowning and scolding. They are your elders. After all, apologize to them. Elders? They were nothing but a pack of wolves. I had to make them pay. Before I could say anything, my stepmother grabbed Jonathan's hand and tearfully complained, "Thomas, don't let her get away with this." Becky was pushed to the ground by her, and she lost a lot of blood. The doctor said the baby might be gone. In an instant, my stepmother's eyes turned bloodshot. Her face twisted with rage, as if she wished I were dead. A dark look flashed in Jonathan's eyes. He patted my stepmother's hand reassuringly. "Don't worry, Auntie. I will make sure Becky gets justice." Then he glared at me, warning me with his eyes. "You better pray nothing happens to Becky, or I won't let you off." I glanced at the closed doors of the operating room and interrupted him. "She fell on her own. It has nothing to do with me." Jonathan frowned deeply and then harshly reprimanded me. "Celeste, not everyone is as cold-blooded as you. This was our first child, a living being." I looked at him deeply but said nothing. We were supposed to have a child once, at the beginning of the company's founding, but it was bad timing, right when our future was uncertain, and we were overwhelmed with work. I was working so hard that my periods became irregular. Because my periods were often late, we didn't know about the pregnancy until we lost the baby. Back then, Jonathan didn't blame me. Instead, he felt sorry for me. When the company was short-handed, he let me rest and recover. We never managed to have another child after that, and the miscarriage had always been a sore spot in my heart. I didn't expect Jonathan to bring up the subject of children today to emphasize the importance of Rebecca's unborn child. If that child had lived, he would be in elementary school by now. Indeed, after all these years, Jonathan still knew where my pain lay. Seeing me subdued, my stepmother thought she had an opportunity. She immediately made a demand, according to the agreement. "Since Thomas doesn't remember you, you must divorce immediately. But now that Becky has been hurt and is in the hospital because of you, you owe us compensation. Your mother's house, though not worth much, should be enough to cover Becky's medical expenses." In the early years, Jonathan and I had no significant assets. The only valuable thing I owned was the house my mother left me. My stepmother's calculation was shrewd, aiming to maximize her gain by seizing my premarital property. I looked up at my father, who couldn't hide his excitement. At that moment, I found it incredibly ironic. My husband was backing up my father, helping him take a bite out of me. "All right, we can sign the compensation agreement first. Once Rebecca is able to get out of bed, I'll go with her to transfer the property." The three of them beamed with joy, as if the person lying in the operating room didn't matter. Shortly after, Jonathan's secretary brought 2 agreements as requested. One was the divorce agreement between Jonathan and me. The division of assets was unfair, but I glanced at the operating room and said nothing. Signing my name, the agreement would take effect a month later, on the day we received the divorce certificate. The other agreement was for compensating Rebecca. Effective immediately, Rebecca could come with me to transfer the property at any time. After signing both agreements, Rebecca was wheeled out of the operating room. Upon learning that she had indeed lost the baby, I felt a mix of emotions. Chapter 9. The next morning, as soon as I stepped out of the house, I had a bad feeling. Better safe than sorry. I immediately hired 2 bodyguards. With them flanking me, I left the house with a heavy heart. I hadn't expected my fears to be confirmed so soon. A van began following us as soon as we left. Fortunately, the bodyguards were reliable, and we quickly managed to shake off the trailing van. My mind raced as I tried to figure out who might have hired someone to follow me. Whoever it was a dangerous sign for me. When we finally reached the Civil Affairs Bureau, I found Rebecca and Jonathan already waiting. As soon as I stepped out of the car, a strong force pulled me back inside. Before I could react, the car door was smashed and deformed. The van had rammed into us. They were trying to kill me. My mind went blank, and I started shaking uncontrollably, nearing a state of shock. When I finally got out of the car, the van driver had already been subdued by the bodyguards. The air was thick with the smell of alcohol. I looked at the driver, and his snarling face began to merge with a memory. It was Samuel, the drunk driver who went to prison years ago. My mother and Jonathan's family had died under his wheels, and now he was trying to use the same method to kill me. Why? I didn't even know him. The police investigation back then had found no connection between our families and him. Why did he want to kill me? What benefit was there in killing me? As I pondered this, I suddenly turned to look at Jonathan. His face, sallow from liver cancer, showed hatred and frustration, but no surprise. I remembered the helpless look on Jonathan's face outside the court. His eyes red as he asked me, "Why can't a murderer pay with his life?" It turned out he had never given up on getting Samuel to pay with his life, even if it cost me mine. Seeing Jonathan standing there motionless, my heart suddenly calmed. He had never intended to divorce me. He wanted to inherit everything after my death. But why pretend to have amnesia? With such poor acting skills, he couldn't have fooled me. Or perhaps he never intended to hide his fake amnesia from me in the first place. Unable to make sense of it all, the police arrived. As the police handcuffed Samuel, Jonathan walked over. He handed a USB drive to the police, saying, "I want to report Samuel and Rebecca for attempted murder." This is the surveillance footage from the hospital room. Rebecca's face turned deathly pale. She looked at Jonathan in disbelief and said, "You set me up?" Jonathan remained indifferent, looking at her with nothing but disgust. He coldly said, "It was you who gave up on me first. How dare you ask me to marry you after I became successful? Just because my mother refused your unreasonable demands, you had your lapdog kill them. All these years, I've been waiting for a chance to bring you to justice. Finally, I've got it. Do you think I pretended to have amnesia out of love? Did you really think I had fallen for you?" Jonathan's eyes glistened with tears as he spoke, gripping Rebecca's hand tightly to prevent her from escaping. Rebecca struggled, trying to break free from Jonathan's grasp. "No, you can't do this. I was pregnant with your child." "My child?" Jonathan sneered. "If it was my child, why did you have a miscarriage the day after I mentioned a paternity test?" "It was Celeste. She pushed me." Rebecca suddenly remembered. She looked at me and commanded, "Celeste, if you can persuade Jonathan, I won't hold you accountable for causing my miscarriage." I clenched my fists, remembering the bloody sight of my mother, and wanted nothing more than to tear her apart. How dare she? Those were 5 living, breathing lives, before Rebecca could be taken away. I stepped forward and slapped her. Then I whispered in her ear, "Don't worry about it. For extortion and blackmail, that house is worth $3 million. That's enough to put your mother behind bars for 10 years. Rebecca stared at me with wide eyes. She knew that if her mother went to jail, she was finished. She began to shout hysterically, "Celeste, you bitch. You'll die a miserable death." Seeing me walk towards the police, she broke down in tears, trying to shift the blame. The miscarriage was an accident. Jonathan is the real mastermind behind all this. I told him to divorce you immediately, but he said you wouldn't agree easily. That's why he pretended to have amnesia to fool you. He's the one who told me that turning the spouse's property into inheritance was the plan. Realizing something, she abruptly turned to Jonathan. "Did you never plan to divorce her? Was the amnesia just a way to keep me in line?" "You." Before Rebecca could finish, Samuel suddenly lunged forward, choking her violently. "Didn't you say it was that little bitch who caused my son's miscarriage?" "Rebecca, you whore. I went to prison for you for so many years, and now you want to dump me for real? I won't let you get away with this." Chapter 10. Since there was no direct evidence linking the accident to Jonathan, he was not detained. By the time Jonathan and I finished giving our statements, it was already midnight. Jennifer was waiting in the car with the 2 bodyguards. "I'll write my will as soon as I get back. If I die, I'll leave my company shares to Director Hahn and donate all my other assets to charity. You won't get a penny." Director Hahn was the 3rd largest shareholder in the company after Jonathan and me. If I died, Director Hahn would inherit my shares, and the company would be under his control. If Jonathan still wanted the company, He wouldn't be able to harm me. Jonathan pressed his lips together, not surprised by my decision. It seemed he had already prepared himself the moment I learned the truth. As long as you give me the shares, I won't want anything else. I shook my head, disagreeing with his terms. He might not even realize how terrible he looked after staying up all night. His illness must have worsened recently. I didn't mind adding fuel to the fire. We didn't have time to register the divorce today, so Jonathan and I agreed to go first thing in the morning. Watching his departing figure, I turned and walked toward Jennifer. Jonathan, there will be no tomorrow. The moment you handed over that USB drive, your fate was sealed. I didn't go home but instead took Jennifer and the bodyguards to an apartment complex. The complex was mostly dark, with only a few scattered lights waiting for those who came home late. Before dawn, a group of people arrived outside the complex. Upon closer inspection, I saw it was my father and his relatives. After waiting for about 4 or 5 minutes, I took out the information Jennifer had helped me gather. The file contained only a photo and an address. The woman, with a pregnant belly, leaned closely against the man, their eyes filled with tenderness and love for each other. That address was where we were now standing. An hour earlier, I had sent the address to my father with a note saying that if Jonathan forgave Rebecca, I would too. As expected, they brought people to force Jonathan into forgiveness. After living together for so many years, I knew how my father's relatives operated. When words failed, they resorted to threats. This morning would be Jonathan's life and death moment. I stood at the entrance of the complex for about 30 minutes before I heard the sound of an ambulance. As the paramedics loaded the patient into the ambulance, Jennifer and the bodyguards kept the others at bay. Facing Catherine's shocked expression, I smiled at the doctor and said, "I'm the patient's wife. Let's go." Chapter 11. Jonathan is the person who knows me best in this world, and I am the person who knows him best. I always thought Jonathan wanted to provoke me into divorcing him quickly so he could give Rebecca's child a legitimate status. When I received Catherine's call, I was indeed infuriated. However, while waiting at a red light, I suddenly recalled Catherine's resume. Coming from a poor background, yet resilient and determined, she ranked in the top 10 in the city for the college entrance exam that year. After graduation, she joined Jonathan's company directly. An extremely outstanding young woman. Moreover, I had seen her photo. She was a natural beauty without makeup. Jonathan, who could abandon his heavy and spicy food preferences to match his status, would never be attracted to a useless woman like my stepsister. Even I couldn't figure out what about her could captivate him. Over the years, many people tried to latch onto Jonathan, but he rejected them all. If it was just the halo of a first love, Jonathan wouldn't have bent over backward for her to the point of bringing her relatives to work at the company, especially since my mother once tried to help these relatives find jobs, but they only wanted to take it easy. Now, it was even more impossible for them to change their ways and work hard at the company. And with my stepsister's character, how could she tolerate the presence of someone like Catherine around Jonathan for years? It seemed my stepsister and her relatives were just tools to provoke me. As for what role Catherine played in all this, I had no idea. When I arrived at the company, I specifically took a tour to see if Catherine was being threatened. But when I finished my tour, I found that Catherine's workstation was already empty. That's when I realized Catherine had lied. I played it smart and didn't go to the private investigator from back then. Instead, I asked Jennifer to help me investigate Catherine. The results were surprising. Catherine owned a property worth $30 million. Even though Catherine's salary at the company was substantial. Given her background, she couldn't have afforded such an expensive house. After several days of surveillance, Jennifer's friend finally made a discovery. He captured photos of Jonathan and Catherine together. That's when I realized the person who destroyed our marriage was the poor student I had sponsored. The private investigator I hired had long been bought off by Jonathan, so I decided to play along and wait for Jonathan to make his move. After all, he didn't have long to live, and I was just waiting to send him to the hospital. I initially thought he merely wanted to make me give up and divorce him quickly, but when my stepsister fell, I realized Jonathan had bigger plans. In the hospital, Jonathan never once glanced at the operating room. There was even excitement in his eyes. This was also why, when I felt uneasy the next morning, I immediately hired bodyguards without hesitation. When he reported Samuel, I knew he intended to use Samuel to kill me. He never planned to divorce me. He wanted my inheritance. Through his fake amnesia, he gradually provoked me, hoping I would retaliate against Rebecca, thereby making Samuel come after me. But I didn't react as he expected. Instead of going crazy and targeting Rebecca in my rage, Jonathan had to act himself. Samuel's old case had passed the statute of limitations, making it impossible to reopen it. Years ago, Rebecca had persuaded Samuel to drive drunk and kill. If Jonathan could convince Rebecca again, Samuel would commit another crime. He could still bring Samuel to justice. His tender act while pretending to have amnesia was not only to make Rebecca fall in love with him but also to make her realize that the wealth she saw could have all been hers. Human greed can be limitless, especially for a gold digger like Rebecca. By buying Rebecca houses and cars and bringing my father's relatives into the company, he gradually filled Rebecca's desires. What made her truly determined was the paternity test. Samuel's child became an obstacle to her marrying into wealth and entering high society. She blamed the miscarriage on me to deepen Jonathan's guilt and to give Samuel a reason. It was a perfect excuse to make Samuel go after me. Jonathan was smart throughout it all. He only betrayed our marriage. As my only relative, he could still inherit my estate. He planned well, but he didn't account for his limited time. A mere push from my father's relative left him incapacitated. Jonathan fell into a coma after being hospitalized. As his only guardian, I ensured he received the best treatment and sent him abroad. By the time Catherine found out, Jonathan's organs were already failing, and I was discussing selling my shares with several directors. Even after selling the company, I could still enjoy the life I once had. The caregiver I hired told me that Jonathan had started to regret his actions and wanted to see me. I didn't go to see him. There is no cure for regret, and I no longer needed his remorse. Moreover, I had come to enjoy the freedom of being a wealthy single woman. I could do whatever I wanted without considering Jonathan's feelings. I heard that Catherine had used all her resources to find Jonathan but couldn't locate him. I knew she wanted to establish their child's legitimacy while Jonathan was still alive to claim part of the inheritance. How could I let her succeed? I immediately informed the hospital to cease treatment and let Jonathan fend for himself. After Jonathan died, I had his body cremated and liquidated his assets. Selling his shares, I discovered that over the years, he had spent a considerable amount on Catherine, while he only bought Rebecca a refurbished car and paid the down payment for the villa. It was clear whom Jonathan truly loved. I applied to the court to reclaim the marital property. Catherine, in the end, returned to her hometown with her newborn child. I didn't make things difficult for her. When Mr. and Mrs. Jean were alive, they treated me well. So I considered this leaving a legacy for the Jean family. As for my father's family, after recovering the down payment, they came to me with the compensation contract. I immediately had my bodyguards and lawyers block them and sued them for extortion and fraud. After noticing Jonathan's odd behavior, I had installed hidden cameras in my home, which captured Rebecca's staged performance. The contract was evidence of their fraudulent scam. Jonathan knew the loopholes in the contract, but he didn't stop me. It seemed he hated everyone around Rebecca and wanted my father's family in jail as well. Seeing my stepmother beat and kick my father after I mentioned the fraud charges, shouting, "Look at the daughter you raised. Not only did she get our Becky into prison, but she also wants us in there too." Watching the farce before me, I felt immense satisfaction, finally avenging my mother. As for Samuel and Rebecca's case, it is still under investigation. I heard that the police found new evidence suggesting that Jonathan's liver cancer was caused by Samuel's prolonged poisoning. In the apartment Jonathan rented for Rebecca, Samuel applied the drugs to Jonathan's toothbrush and utensils. He wanted Rebecca to quickly inherit the estate after marrying Jonathan, so they could reunite as a family of 3 soon. However, he feared Rebecca might ruin things, so he didn't tell anyone about it. In the end, it worked out in my favor. Leaving the lawyer to negotiate with my father's family, I walked out of the villa. I called Jennifer, and her excited voice came through the receiver. "What's up, my rich lady? Let's go shopping today. It's on me."